Welcome to our channel. Enjoy our story and don't forget to subscribe.
The last real conversation I had with my mama was about the garden. Not the big things, not the things you'd expect if you were writing this down like some kind of script. She didn't sit me down and tell me she loved me one final time in some grand movie way. She didn't hold my face in her hands and say something that was going to haunt me forever. No. She was lying in that hospice bed they'd set up in her bedroom, the one with the old quilt, the blue and white one her own mother had made, the one that was soft as breath. And she turned her head toward the window and looked out at the backyard and said, "Elaine, you make sure nobody paves over that garden." And I laughed. I actually laughed out loud because what do you do with that? The woman is dying. The doctors had already come and gone. The morphine was making her eyes go glassy and slow, and she was talking about the garden, about the tomatoes, about the little raised beds she'd built herself 15 years ago, back, when her knees still worked, back when she could kneel in the dirt for an hour without her back screaming at her. I laughed, and I squeezed her hand, and I said, "Nobody's paving anything, Mama, don't you worry." She looked at me then, and for just a second, just 1 second, she was completely clear, completely herself. The fog lifted and her eyes were sharp and steady, and she was looking at me the way she used to when I was small and I'd done something wrong and she knew it, and I knew she knew it, and there was no point in lying. She held my gaze for a long time, longer than felt comfortable, and then she smiled. Not a sad smile, not a goodbye smile. A smile like she knew something I didn't. Like she'd already figured out a puzzle I hadn't even started yet. Then the moment passed, the fog came back, and 3 days later, she was gone. She died on a Tuesday morning in March, the kind of March that can't make up its mind. Still cold, but there was this thin, pale light coming through the windows that almost felt like spring trying to break through. I was holding her hand. I'd been holding it for hours by then, sitting in the chair I'd pulled up right next to the bed, and my back ached, and my legs were stiff, and I hadn't slept more than 2 or 3 hours at a stretch in weeks. But I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't leaving her alone in that room. It wasn't dramatic the way she went. That's the thing nobody tells you about watching someone die slowly. There's no single moment you can point to, no gasp, no final squeeze of the hand, no eyes fluttering open one last time. She was breathing, and then she was breathing slower, and then she wasn't breathing at all, and the room just went quiet, like someone had turned off a sound I hadn't even realized was on. And I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long, 10 minutes, 20, just holding her hand and feeling the warmth start to leave her fingers. I didn't call anyone right away, I know. That sounds strange, maybe, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for the phone calls and the crying and the arrangements and the whole machine of grief and obligation that kicks into gear the second someone officially knows. Those minutes were mine, hers and mine. So I just sat with her. I talked to her a little, told her I was okay, told her not to worry, said the same things she used to say to me when I was sick as a kid and scared of the dark. And then I called Mrs. Dawson next door because she was the kind of neighbor who needed to know. And then I called David, and then the world started moving again. My name is Elaine. Elaine Castillo, though I'd been Elaine Marsh for 11 years by that point, 11 years married to David, which sounds like a long time and feels like both forever and nothing at all, depending on the day. I teach 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary, have for 12 years. I love it the way some people love breathing. It's just part of how I work, how I'm wired. I love the kids. I love the quiet chaos of a classroom full of 9-year-olds who are just starting to figure out how the world works. It grounds me. It always has. I'd taken a leave of absence from school to be with my mama during those last weeks. Not a formal thing at first, just days here and there, calling in sick, taking personal days until I ran out. And then my principal, Mrs. Torres, she pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Elaine, just go. We'll figure it out. Your mama needs you, and that's where you need to be." And I cried right there in her office, which I almost never do, because that's just the kind of place Millbrook is. People look out for each other there. That's what small towns do when they're working the way they're supposed to. David was good about it, or at least he seemed good about it. He said the right things. "Take all the time you need, honey. Go be with your mom." He'd text me during the day, "How is she today?" And when I came home at night, sometimes he'd have dinner ready, or at least the table set, and he'd pour me a glass of wine without asking and sit with me on the couch and let me talk or not talk, whatever I needed. He rubbed my shoulders. He held me when I cried in the middle of the night, which happened more often than I'd like to admit. He was warm and solid and present in all the ways that matter when someone you love is falling apart. I believed every single minute of it. That's the thing people don't understand about living with someone like David. They hear the story later and they think, "How did you not see it? How could you not tell?" And I get it. I do. But here's what I know after 11 years of marriage, and what I knew even then, even in the middle of all of it. David was not a bad person. Not exactly. He was a person who had learned very early and very well how to be what other people needed him to be. And for a long time, a real, genuine, actual, long time, that was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything. The funeral was on a Friday. My mama didn't want anything big. She'd written that down, actually, in a little spiral notebook she kept on her nightstand, the one with the blue cover that she used for everything. Grocery lists, phone numbers, things she wanted to remember. I found it after she died, flipped through it looking for I don't know what, and there, on one of the last pages, in her handwriting, that careful slanted print she'd had her whole life. It said, "No big fuss, church, Pastor Malone, hymn, Amazing Grace, lunch after, at the house, nothing fancy, let people eat." So that's what we did. Small service at First Methodist, the church she'd gone to for 40 years, the one where she knew every single person by name and they all knew hers. Pastor Malone did the service. We played Amazing Grace. And about 60 people came, which for Mama was basically a crowd, and afterward they all came back to the house and ate the casseroles and the finger sandwiches and the fruit plates that the church ladies had put together, because that's what church ladies do. They show up with food. It's an entire language, and my mama spoke it fluently. I stood through the whole thing in a black dress that was too tight across the chest because I hadn't worn it in 3 years, and I'd lost weight I didn't mean to lose in the last month, and I felt like I was watching everything from the bottom of a lake. Everything was muffled. Everything was slow and distorted and happening to someone slightly removed from me. People hugged me and said things. She was such a beautiful soul. She's in a better place now. You take care of yourself, sweetheart. And I nodded and said thank you, and none of it landed. Not really. Not yet. David stood right beside me the entire time, through the service, through the reception, through all of it. He held my hand during the prayer. He kept his arm around my waist when we were standing in line talking to people. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked them for the food, played the part of the grieving son-in-law so naturally that I felt grateful for it, genuinely grateful. He was making it easier. That's what I thought. He was shouldering some of the weight so I didn't have to carry all of it alone. He wore a dark suit I hadn't seen before. He told me he'd bought it that week. Didn't have anything appropriate, he said, and didn't want to show up looking sloppy for my mama's funeral. I didn't think a thing of it. You don't when you're grieving. Your brain isn't looking for clues. It's just trying to survive the next hour. Janine was there too, my best friend since college. Since sophomore year, actually, when we ended up in the same terrible intro to sociology class and bonded over how much we both hated it. She drove 3 hours from Columbus without me even having to ask. I'd texted her, "Mama's funeral is Friday," and she texted back, "I'll be there. What do you need?" And I said, "Just you." And she sent back a single heart emoji, which is not her style at all, which tells you everything about how serious it was. She showed up at the reception with 2 bottles of red wine, the good kind, the kind she knew I'd actually drink, and a casserole she'd made herself, which was impressive because Janine's relationship with the kitchen has historically been adversarial. She set everything down on the kitchen counter without a word, found me on the back porch, and sat down next to me on the steps. Not close enough to crowd me, close enough to be felt. We sat like that for a while. The backyard stretched out in front of us. My mama's yard with the garden she loved, the raised beds just starting to show the first green shoots of early spring. Someone had left the porch light on, and it cast this warm circle of gold onto the grass, and everything beyond it was dark and quiet. And for a minute, it almost felt peaceful. Almost. "You doing okay?" Janine asked. Not in the way people had been asking all day. That careful, tiptoeing way, like they were afraid of what the answer might be. She asked it straight, like she actually wanted to know. "No," I said. She nodded. Good answer. We drank our wine. We watched the yard. A few crickets were starting up, even though it was still early for them. And Janine didn't fill the silence with anything, which is one of the things I love most about her. She knows when words would just be noise. After a while, she said, "Your mama would have liked this. The quiet." And that one hit me. That one actually got through the underwater feeling and landed somewhere real and deep. And I felt my throat tighten and my eyes burn, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through it. Because she was right. Mama would have loved sitting right here, on these steps with the garden in front of her and the night coming in soft and slow. She used to do exactly this every evening in the summer. Just sit out here with a glass of iced tea and watch the light change, watching the garden like it was the best show she'd ever seen. I went back inside eventually. David found me in the kitchen, kissing my cheek, asking if I wanted more wine. I said no. I was tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that goes past your body and into something deeper. I wanted to go home and sleep for a week. So we went home. That was Friday night. By Sunday afternoon, I still hadn't slept more than a few hours at a stretch. The house felt too big and too quiet, and I kept reaching for my phone to call my mama before I remembered. Every single time. Reach for the phone, start to dial, remember, put it back down. That's grief in those first days. It's not one big wave of sadness. It's 100 small collisions with reality over and over all day long. Each one a little jolt, a little reminder that the world has changed and your body hasn't caught up yet. David was moving around the house like normal, making coffee, checking his phone, watching something on TV in the living room. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, staring at nothing, when he came in and sat down next to me, not too close. He picked up the remote and muted the TV. "Hey," he said. "Elaine?" Something in his tone made me look at him. Not the word, just the way he said it. Careful, measured. The way you say someone's name when you've been rehearsing what comes next. "I think we should talk," he said. And there it was, that flicker, that small cold thing I felt move through me like a draft under a door. I couldn't have named it then, couldn't have told you what it was. But something in my body knew before my mind did. Something in the way he was sitting, slightly angled away from me, shoulders set, hands folded in his lap like he was about to have a business meeting. Something in the way he wasn't quite looking at me. He got up, walked into the kitchen. came back with a manila envelope, a thick one, the kind that has real weight to it, the kind that means there's something serious inside. He set it down on the coffee table in front of me, not handed it to me, set it down, placed it there, precisely in the center of the table, like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. "I think it's time we were honest with each other," he said. I looked at the envelope, then I looked at him, and for the first time in 11 years of marriage, I saw something in his face I couldn't quite read. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't sadness, it was something else, something almost like relief, like a man who'd been holding his breath for a long time and had finally let it out. I picked up the envelope, opened it, slid the papers out. The word at the top of the first page was dissolution, and my mama's garden, just 40 minutes away, was already growing in the dark. I want to tell you what it feels like. The moment the ground gives out under you, not the way it happens in movies, not the dramatic collapse, not the tears, not the screaming. It's quieter than that, smaller. It's a feeling like the air in the room just changed temperature, and you can't figure out why, and your body knows something your brain is still catching up to. That's what happened when I read the word dissolution at the top of that first page. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, holding those papers, and I read. And I read slowly, because my hands were shaking just enough to make the words blur at the edges, and because some part of me, the part that had spent 11 years learning to trust this man, was hoping, genuinely hoping, that I was misunderstanding what I was looking at, that there was some explanation, that he was going to laugh and say, no, that's not what this is, that it was a joke or a test or something I was too tired and too grief-stricken to interpret correctly. He didn't laugh. He sat on the other end of the couch, and he watched me read, and his face was perfectly calm, not cold exactly, composed, the way a person looks when they've already had this conversation in their own head a dozen times, and they're just waiting for you to catch up. "David," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat, like it belonged to someone else. "I know this isn't the best timing," he said. I looked up at him, and I almost laughed at that. I almost actually laughed, because what a thing to say. What an incredible, staggering thing to say. My mother had been in the ground for 2 days. 2 days. And here he was, talking about timing. "What is this?" I asked, even though I knew, even though the papers in my hands were very clear about what it was. He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, clasped his hands together. And then he did the thing that I would later understand was the most dangerous part of all of it. He explained himself calmly, reasonably, like he was talking me through something sensible. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said, "and I think we both know that things between us have been difficult for a long time. And I think the fair thing, the mature thing, is to talk about it now, before everything gets more complicated. Before everything gets more complicated." That's the sentence that should have broken through. That's the sentence that, if I'd been thinking clearly, if I hadn't been running on 4 hours of sleep and grief and the particular kind of fog that comes after you've watched your mother die, might have made me stop and really look at him, really listen. Because there was something underneath it. Something about the way he said complicated, that was pointed, directional, like he was aiming at something specific and didn't want to name it yet. But I didn't hear it then. Not really. I was too far inside the shock of it, too busy trying to make the shape of what was happening fit with the shape of the man I thought I knew. "You already have a lawyer," I said. It wasn't a question. The paperwork was too clean, too organized, too prepared for this to be something that had just occurred to him. He nodded. I talked to someone last week, just to understand my options. I wasn't trying to go behind your back, Elaine. I just wanted to know where we stood before I brought it up. Last week, before the funeral, before my mama was even in the ground, he'd been sitting across from a lawyer last week in some office somewhere, talking about how to divide up our life, while I was sitting at my mother's bedside holding her hand and watching her disappear. I sat with that for a minute. Just sat with it. The papers in my lap, the weight of them, the neat little staples in the corner. Someone had paid attention to the details. Someone had made sure every page was in order, every blank was in the right place. Someone had done this carefully and deliberately, like it mattered that it was done right. Is there someone else? I asked. He shook his head. No, God, no. Elaine, this isn't about that. And here's the thing that makes this so hard to explain to people afterward. I believed him. In that moment, sitting on that couch, I believed that part. Because as far as I knew, there wasn't someone else. And David, for all the things he was, had never been a cheater. That wasn't his particular hunger. His hunger was different, quieter, less visible. It lived in places I wouldn't find for a long time. Then why? I asked. Why now? Why today? He looked at me for a long time before he answered. And when he did, he chose his words very carefully, the way you choose words when you've practiced them. Because I think it's better to deal with things now, he said, before the estate gets sorted out, before it gets messy. The estate. He said it so casually, so naturally, like it was just another word in the sentence, like it didn't carry the weight it carried, but I heard it, even through everything else, through the shock and the grief and the disorientation. I heard that word, and something in my stomach tightened. My mama's estate, her house, the property, the savings she'd built up over 3 decades of careful, quiet living. The kind of quiet living that people in our family did, the kind where you don't show what you have. You just have it. My mama had grown up poor, genuinely poor. The kind of poor where you don't eat if there isn't enough to go around. And she had spent her entire adult life making sure she never felt that way again. Not in a flashy way, in a steady, invisible way. She bought her house outright in 1992, paid cash, and she never told a single person how she did it. She drove the same car for 12 years. She wore the same coats. She clipped coupons until the day she died. And underneath all of that, underneath the coupons and the worn-out shoes and the way she'd reuse a plastic bag until it fell apart, underneath all of that, she had built something real, something solid, something that was worth a great deal more than most people would have guessed. David knew this. I had told him, early in our marriage, the general shape of things, not the numbers. My mama never told me the exact numbers, and I never asked, because that's not how we were raised, and it felt private, like something that belonged to her alone. But I'd told him enough for him to understand that when my mama was gone, there would be something there, something significant. And he was sitting on my couch, 2 days after her funeral, telling me it was time to be honest with each other. I set the papers back in the envelope, set it on the coffee table, and I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw the calculation behind his eyes. Not malice, not cruelty. Something worse in a way, something colder, something that looked exactly like math. I need you to leave, I said. He didn't argue. That was the part that surprised me. He didn't push back, didn't try to explain more, didn't reach for my hand or say something soft and apologetic. He just nodded slowly, like he'd expected this, like it was part of the plan. He stood up, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, walked toward the bedroom to grab a bag, and I listened to him open drawers, open the closet, move through the room we'd shared for a decade like he was packing for a trip he'd been looking forward to. He came back through the living room with a duffel bag over his shoulder, stopped in front of me for a second, looked at me with an expression I still can't fully describe, something between sympathy and satisfaction, like a man who has just closed a deal and feels good about the terms. "Take care of yourself, Elaine," he said. And then he left, and the front door clicked shut behind him, and the house went quiet, and I sat there on the couch for a very long time without moving. I called Janine at 11 o'clock that night. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd been thinking about me, which is just who Janine is. She's the kind of friend who carries you with her even when you're not in the room. "Hey," she said. "How you doing?" I tried to tell her. I really did. But the words kept coming out wrong, kept coming out in the wrong order, because my brain was still trying to process what had happened and my mouth was trying to say it at the same time, and none of it was making sense yet. So I just said, "David left." There was a pause, a short one. And then Janine said, "What do you mean, left?" "He gave me divorce papers," I said. "Tonight. 2 days after the funeral, Janine. 2 days." Another pause, longer this time. And when she spoke again, her voice had changed. It had gone flat and quiet in a way I'd only heard a few times in all the years I'd known her. It was the voice she used when she was very, very angry and working very, very hard not to show it. "Okay," she said. "Okay, listen to me. Do not sign anything. Do you hear me? Do not touch those papers. Do not look at them again tonight. Do not call him. Do not respond to anything he sends you. Can you do that?" "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I can do that." "Good. I'm coming over tomorrow morning, early, and we're going to figure this out. Together, okay?" "Okay." "And Elaine?" "Yeah?" "Eat something, even if it's just crackers. Your body needs something." I ate crackers. I sat on the couch and ate crackers out of the box and stared at the manila envelope on the coffee table and tried to feel something other than the strange, buzzing numbness that had taken over my entire body. And I couldn't. I couldn't feel anything. It was like someone had turned down the volume on the world, and everything, the grief, the betrayal, the fear, was there, right underneath the surface. But I couldn't reach it yet. Janine showed up at 8 the next morning with coffee from the good place, not the drive-thru, the actual cafe downtown, and a box of those lemon pastries I used to eat in college when I was stressed. She didn't say anything when she came in, just handed me the coffee, set the pastries on the kitchen counter, and sat down at the table across from me. She looked at the envelope, then she looked at me. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her the whole thing. The way he sat down, the way he said it, the words he used. Fair. Mature. Before it gets complicated. I told her about the suit he'd bought for the funeral, about how calm he'd been, about the way he'd said the estate, like it was just a word in a sentence. And I watched Janine's face as I talked, watched the way her jaw tightened, watched the way her eyes went hard and sharp and focused, the way they do when she's putting pieces together when she's seeing a pattern that someone else missed. Janine's a paralegal, has been for 14 years. She works at a firm in Columbus that handles family law, among other things. She knows what divorce paperwork looks like. She knows what it means when someone shows up with a folder that thick, that organized, that ready. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a long time. She picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, set it back down. "He planned this," she said. "Not a question." "I know," I said. "No. I mean, he planned it. Before your mama died. Before the funeral. Probably before she was even gone." She leaned forward. Elaine, think about it. He had a lawyer. He had the papers ready. He had the timing figured out. You don't do that in 2 days. You don't even do that in a week. Someone sat down and thought this through. I knew she was right. I'd felt it the second I saw the envelope, that sense of something premeditated, something that had been in motion long before it landed on my coffee table. But hearing it out loud, hearing Janine say it in her calm, precise, paralegal voice, made it real in a different way, made it land differently, because it meant that while I was sitting at my mother's bedside, holding her hand, watching her fade, while I was the most vulnerable I had ever been in my entire life, David had been somewhere else, quietly, methodically, building a plan to take what he could get. "What do I do?" I asked. Janine looked at me for a long time, and then she said something I wasn't expecting. "You need to talk to your mama's lawyer." I blinked. "What? Why?" "Because your mama had a lawyer, Elaine. You told me that years ago. She used him for the house, for her taxes, for whatever else she needed. And if she was as sharp as you say she was, and she was, I met her, I know she was, then she already thought about this, about what happens when she's gone, about who gets what, about how it's protected." I sat with that for a minute. My mama's lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, Gerald Hargrove. I hadn't thought about him in years, not since the last time my mama mentioned him, which must have been 2 or 3 years before she got sick. He was old, older than her, quiet, the kind of man you'd pass on the street and never notice, which, thinking about it now, was probably exactly the point. "Do you have his number?" Janine asked. "It's in her notebook," I said. "The one on her nightstand. She wrote everything in that notebook." "Then go get it," Janine said. "Today, not tomorrow, today." And something in the way she said it, something urgent underneath the steadiness of her voice, made me pay attention, made me really hear her. Because Janine doesn't panic. Janine doesn't make things bigger than they are. If she was telling me to move fast, there was a reason. So I went. I drove to my mama's house that afternoon. It was still unlocked. I had the key, had had it for years, but I'd never needed to use it before, because Mama was always home, always there, always the one opening the door. Walking in without her on the other side of it was the hardest thing I'd done since she died. Harder than the funeral. Harder than standing in that hospice room, because the house still smelled like her, like the lavender soap she used and the coffee she drank every morning, black, no sugar, from the same pot she'd had for 20 years. The smell of her was everywhere, soaked into the walls, into the curtains, into the very air, and it hit me the second I stepped through the door, and I had to press my hand flat against the hallway wall and just breathe for a minute. I went to her bedroom. The hospice bed was gone. Someone had come and taken it while I was at the funeral, which I was grateful for, because I don't think I could have looked at it. Her bed was there, the real one, the one with the blue quilt. It was made up neatly the way she always left it, like she'd just gotten up that morning, like she was somewhere in the house, in the kitchen or the garden, and she'd be back in a minute. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I cried. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying I'd been doing for weeks. This was the ugly kind, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep you didn't know it was there. The kind where your whole body shakes and you can't breathe right, and the sound you're making doesn't even sound like you. I cried for my mama. I cried for David. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, and the life I thought I was building, and the way it had all come apart so fast, so quietly, so completely, and I hadn't even seen it coming. When it was over, when my body had nothing left to give, I wiped my face. I reached over to the nightstand, and I picked up the blue notebook. It was heavier than I expected. Not physically. It was just a notebook, just a spiral-bound thing with a blue cover and a pen clip on the side. But it felt heavy, like it carried something in it, like it mattered. I flipped through it slowly. Grocery lists, a dentist appointment, a phone number for the plumber, the name of a bird she'd seen in the backyard. Cardinal. Big one. Sat on the fence for 10 minutes. A little note to herself. Buy more of the good tea, the kind in the green box. And then, near the back, a page with a different kind of entry. Neater, more deliberate. Like she'd sat down and written it carefully, on purpose, when she had time to think. At the top of the page, in her careful slanted print, it said, Gerald Hargrove, everything is ready. Don't let them rush you. I stared at that for a long time. Don't let them rush you. And I thought about what Janine had said. And I thought about the way my mama had looked at me that last clear day, with that smile that meant she knew something. And I thought about the garden, about the way she'd said, make sure nobody paves it over. And for the first time since David had set that envelope down on my coffee table, I felt something other than grief and shock and numbness. I felt something that was almost like hope. I wrote down the number. I closed the notebook. I put it back on the nightstand, exactly where she'd kept it. And I left the house, locking the door behind me, and I drove home in the fading afternoon light with Gerald Hargrove's phone number on a piece of paper in my pocket, and something shifting, slowly, quietly, deep inside my chest. I didn't know yet what my mama had done. I didn't know what was waiting for me in that lawyer's office. I didn't know that the smartest thing she ever did, the thing that would change everything, had nothing to do with the garden at all. But I was starting to suspect. I called Gerald Hargrove on a Monday morning. It took me 2 days to actually dial the number. 2 days of looking at that piece of paper, the one I'd written it on in my mama's bedroom, standing right next to her bed, and picking up my phone and putting it back down again. Not because I was afraid of what he'd say, more because calling felt like the next real step in something I wasn't sure I was ready to take. Like once I made that call, there was no going back to the version of my life where I didn't know what I was about to know. But Janine called me Sunday night and said, "Did you call him?" And when I said no, she said, "Call him first thing tomorrow. First thing, Elaine. Promise me." And I promised. So I called. He answered on the third ring. His voice was exactly what I remembered. Slow, steady, unhurried. The kind of voice that made you feel like whatever was happening, it was going to be okay. Not because he was reassuring you, because he simply didn't seem to believe in panic, like it was a waste of everyone's time. "Mrs. Marsh," he said when I told him who I was. "Elaine, I've been expecting your call." That stopped me. Not the words themselves, the way he said them. Not surprised, not sympathetic, exactly. Just ready. Like he'd been sitting in his office with a cup of coffee and a clear desk, and he'd been waiting for the phone to ring, and he'd known somehow that it would be me. "You were expecting me?" I said. "I was," he said. "Why don't you come in? Wednesday if you can. 10 o'clock. There are some things we need to go over." "What kind of things?" There was a pause, a short one, and then he said, "The kind of things your mother asked me to go over with you when the time was right." I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Not really. I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, and my mind would go in circles. What did he mean when the time was right? What had my mama asked him to do? What was in that office waiting for me? And underneath all of that, underneath the questions, there was something else. Something that felt like a thread being pulled, slowly from the edge of a tapestry I couldn't see yet. Like the picture was already there. I just hadn't stepped back far enough to look at it. Wednesday came. Hargrove's office was on the second floor of a small brick building on Main Street, the kind of building that had been there since before I was born and would probably be there long after I was gone. There was no sign out front, just a number on the door and a small brass plate inside the lobby that said, Hargrove and Associates, though as far as I knew, Gerald Hargrove was the only associate there was. He'd been a one-man operation for as long as my mama had known him, which was decades. She'd gone to him when she bought the house. She'd gone to him when she did her taxes, though I wasn't sure lawyers did taxes. Maybe he just knew someone who did. She went to him the way you go to a doctor you trust completely, without questioning, without shopping around. He was hers, and she was loyal to the people who were hers. I climbed the stairs, knocked on the door at the end of the hall. A woman I didn't recognize, young, quiet, efficient-looking, opened it and led me into a small waiting area with 2 chairs and a water cooler and a print of a landscape on the wall that looked like it had been there for 20 years. She offered me water. I said yes. My mouth was very dry. Then she led me into his office. It was a small room, neat, organized in that particular way that older men organize things. Not precisely, not obsessively, but with a clear sense of where everything belongs and why. There were bookshelves along one wall filled with thick, dark-spined volumes that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. A wooden desk, dark and polished, 2 chairs in front of it. And behind the desk, Gerald Hargrove himself. He was older than I remembered. 70, maybe 72, thin, white hair combed neatly to one side, wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a cardigan, an actual cardigan, the kind with leather patches on the elbows, the kind you'd expect a college professor to wear. Not flashy, not intimidating, not trying to be anything, just a man in a room, doing his job. He stood when I came in, shook my hand, a firm, dry handshake, brief, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Elaine. Make yourself comfortable." I sat. He sat. The young woman closed the door behind us, and the room went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the noise of the world outside had been turned off on purpose. Hargrove folded his hands on the desk, looked at me over his glasses, and for a moment he just studied me, not unkindly, but with a kind of careful attention, like he was reading something written on my face that I didn't know was there. "First," he said, "I'm sorry about your mother. She was one of the finest people I've ever known, and I don't say that lightly." "Thank you," I said. He nodded, took a breath, and then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a folder, a thick one. Manila, like the one David had put on my coffee table, but thicker, heavier. And on the front of it, in neat type letters, it said, Elaine R. Marsh, Estate of Margaret Castillo. He set it on the desk between us. Didn't open it yet. Just let it sit there. "I want to walk you through some things," he said, "and I want to do it slowly, because there's a lot here, and I want to make sure you understand each piece before we move to the next. Can you do that for me?" "Yes," I said. "I can do that." He nodded. "Good." And then he opened the folder. The first thing he showed me was the will. It was simple, cleaner than I expected. My mama had left the house to me, just me, not split with anyone else, because my cousin Lena had gotten her share years earlier when she bought her own place and Mama had helped with the down payment, a quiet, careful way of keeping things even that my Mama had thought through long before anyone else would have. The house, the property, the contents, all to me. I nodded. That made sense. That felt like her. Straightforward, no drama, just the way things should be. "Okay," I said. "That's okay." "That's not the interesting part," Hargrove said. And the way he said it, just slightly, just barely, with the tiniest edge of something that might have been amusement, made me look up. He pulled out the next sheet, a single page, typed, with a seal at the bottom that I didn't recognize. "Your mother created a trust," he said, 15 years ago. 15 years ago. I did the math in my head. That was around the time my mama had started being very quiet about her finances. Not secretive exactly, but private, careful. Like she was building something and she didn't want anyone to see the blueprints. "What kind of trust?" I asked. "An irrevocable trust," he said. "Do you know what that means?" I shook my head. He leaned forward slightly. "It means that once the assets are placed in it, they cannot be changed, moved, or accessed by anyone other than the designated beneficiary, not by creditors, not by a court order in most cases, and not—" He paused here, just for a beat, just long enough for the word to land. "By a spouse in a divorce proceeding." The room was very quiet. I stared at him, and I felt something move inside my chest, something slow and enormous, like a door opening that I hadn't known was there. "My mama did this on purpose," I said. It wasn't a question. Hargrove looked at me, and his expression didn't change. It stayed calm, stayed steady, but something in his eyes shifted, something warm, something that looked like pride. "Your mother," he said, "was one of the most deliberate people I have ever worked with. She came to me 15 years ago and she sat in that chair, the one you're sitting in right now, and she told me exactly what she wanted, and she told me why." "Why?" I asked. My voice was smaller than I wanted it to be. He didn't answer that right away. Instead, he reached back into the "into" folder and pulled out another piece of paper. This one was different from the others. Not typed, handwritten. In that careful, slanted print, I knew better than almost any other handwriting in the world. He set it on the desk, slid it across toward me. "She wrote this about 3 months before she passed," he said. "She gave it to me and asked me to give it to you, when you were ready." I looked down at the paper. At the top, in her handwriting, it said, "For Elaine. Read this alone if you need to, but you don't have to." I didn't read it. Not yet. I couldn't. My hands were shaking again, that same shaking from the night David had given me the divorce papers, and my vision was blurring in a way that had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with the fact that my mother's handwriting was right in front of me, and she was gone, and she had written this knowing she was going to be gone, and she had thought about me, specifically about me, and she had sat down and chosen words and written them down and left them here for me to find. "Can I started. "Take your time," Hargrove said. "There's no rush." I picked up the letter. I held it in both hands, and I read it. I'm not going to tell you every word she wrote. Some of it is mine. Some of it is hers and mine together, and it doesn't belong to anyone else. But I will tell you this much. She knew. She knew about David. She had known for a long time. Not the specifics, not the divorce papers, not the timing, not the exact shape of the plan he was making. She couldn't have known all of that. But she knew the shape of him. She knew what he was. She had seen it years before I did, years before anyone else in my life had seen it, and she had said nothing, not because she didn't care, but because she understood something about me that took me a long time to understand about myself. She knew that if she'd told me, I wouldn't have believed her. Not then. Not when I was still in love with him, or in love with the idea of him, or in love with the life we were building together. She knew that telling me would have pushed me away from her and toward him, and she loved me too much to do that. So instead of telling me, she did something else, something better, something that took years to set up and required her to be smarter than everyone around her without any of them knowing it. She built a wall. Not around herself, around me. She took everything she had, everything she'd spent her entire life building quietly and carefully and invisibly, and she put it somewhere safe, somewhere David couldn't touch, somewhere no lawyer he hired could find a way around. She did it for me, not out of spite, not out of anger, out of love. The kind of love that doesn't make a scene, the kind that just shows up year after year in the things someone did when nobody was watching. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "The garden was never about the tomatoes, sweetheart. It was about what's underneath. I put it there for you, all of it. You're going to be okay. I promise you. You're going to be more than okay." I folded the letter. I held it against my chest, and I cried. Quietly, the way she would have wanted. And Hargrove sat across from me and said nothing and let me have the moment, because he understood that this was not a moment that needed words. When I was ready, he kept going. The trust held the house, free and clear. It held the savings, and the savings were more than I had imagined, more than I had even guessed. My mama had been investing quietly for decades, not in anything flashy, not in anything risky, but in steady, reliable things that grew slowly over time, the way a garden grows. She'd done it herself, mostly, with Hargrove's guidance. She'd read, she'd researched, she'd asked questions, she'd taken her time. And the result was something that, on paper, made Gerald Hargrove smile just slightly when he showed me the numbers. "Your mother," he said, "did not leave you a small inheritance, Elaine." I looked at the number on the page, and my knees actually gave out. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, but I felt them go weak underneath me, felt the chair catch me, felt the air leave my body in a rush, because it was more. It was so much more than I had any idea, more than David had imagined, certainly, more than anyone looking at my mama from the outside, at her coupons and her old car and her worn-out shoes, would have ever guessed. She had hidden it, in plain sight, in the way she lived, in the way she moved through the world. She had been wealthy for years, quietly, invisibly, and nobody knew. Nobody except Gerald Hargrove, who had kept her secret the way she'd asked him to, because that's what good lawyers do for the people who trust them. "Does David know about this?" I asked. About the trust, about any of it. Hargrove shook his head. "The trust is sealed. His name appears nowhere in your mother's estate documents. As far as any legal proceeding is concerned, he has no claim to any of this. None." I sat with that for a long time, sat with the weight of it, the scope of what she'd done, the quiet, patient, years-long architecture of it. My mama, who had never raised her voice in anger in her life. My mama, who had never confronted David directly, never made a scene, never done a single thing that would have made anyone in the room uncomfortable. She had simply, carefully, thoroughly made sure that when the moment came, when someone tried to take what was hers, what was meant for me, they would find nothing there to take. She had won. Before the game had even started, she had already won. I left Hargrove's office that afternoon feeling like I was walking through water. Not the heavy, drowning kind, more like the kind where everything moves slowly, and the light comes in strange, and everything looks slightly different than it did before. The world was the same. The street was the same. The cars, the storefronts, the gray March sky, all the same. But I was different. Something inside me had shifted, fundamentally, irreversibly, and I could feel it settling into place like a bone being set after a break. I called Janine from the car before I even pulled out of the parking lot. "Well," she said, and I told her, all of it. The trust, the numbers, the letter, the way Hargrove had looked at me when he explained what my mama had done. And Janine was quiet for a long time after I finished, longer than I'd ever heard her be quiet about anything. And then she said very softly, "Oh my God, Elaine, your mama." "I know," I said. "No, I mean your mama." And the way she said it, I could hear something in her voice that I hadn't expected, something that sounded almost like reverence. She was something else. She was really something else. "Yeah," I said, and my voice cracked on it just slightly, just enough to feel. The confrontation with David didn't happen the way you might expect. There was no dramatic scene. No one stormed into anyone's office. No one slammed a door or raised their voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. It was quieter than that, smaller, more real. His lawyer called mine, Hargrove, who had become mine now officially, the way he'd been my mama's, about a week after my visit. Something about scheduling a meeting to discuss the terms of the dissolution. "Standard procedure," Hargrove said. "Nothing unusual. He told me to come if I wanted to or stay home if I'd rather. Either way, he'd handle it." I went. The meeting was in a conference room at David's lawyer's office. A newer building, glass and chrome, the kind of place that looked expensive on purpose. David was already there when I walked in, sitting at the long table with his lawyer, a younger man, sharp suit, the kind of lawyer who charges by the minute and makes sure you know it. David looked up when I came in, and for just a second, just 1 second, something flickered across his face, something I hadn't seen before, something that looked like surprise, not the good kind. Hargrove walked in behind me, calm, steady, cardigan and all. He set his folder on the table, took his seat, and nodded politely at everyone in the room. Like this was a Tuesday, like nothing unusual was happening. David's lawyer opened the meeting, started talking about assets, about the marital estate, about what was subject to division and what wasn't. Standard language, dry, procedural, the kind of thing that makes your eyes glaze over if you're not paying attention. And then Hargrove, very quietly, very calmly, opened his folder. "If I may," he said. David's lawyer paused, looked at him. "Go ahead." Hargrove laid out the documents, one at a time, the will, the trust paperwork, the financial records, each one placed precisely on the table, in order, like cards in a hand being revealed one at a time. He didn't rush. He didn't editorialize. He simply showed the papers and explained, in plain language, what each one meant. The house, not part of the marital estate, held in trust. The savings, not part of the marital estate, held in trust. The investments, not part of the marital estate, held in trust. David's lawyer picked up the documents, studied them. His face went very still, the way a person's face goes still when they're reading something they didn't expect and they're trying to figure out what it means for their client and they're realizing, quickly, that it doesn't mean anything good. I watched David's face during all of this, and this is the part I want you to understand, because it matters. This is the part where you see who he actually was, underneath everything, underneath the charm and the good suits and the way he could make you feel like the most important person in any room. He didn't get angry. Not at first. He just went quiet. Very quiet. His jaw tightened, just slightly, and his eyes moved across the papers as his lawyer held them up, and I could see him doing the math. I could see him calculating, recalculating, trying to find an angle, a way in, a crack in the wall my mama had built. And there wasn't one. There wasn't a single crack. She had made sure of that. And then his lawyer leaned over and whispered something to him, something short, something that, from where I was sitting, I couldn't hear. But I saw the effect of it. I saw the color drain from David's face, just slightly, just enough to notice. I saw his hands flat on the table go perfectly still. He looked up, not at his lawyer, at me, and I looked back at him. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. But I said one thing, and I said it clearly, and I said it steadily, and I said it in a voice that surprised even me, because it didn't shake, not even a little. "My mama saw you," I said. "She saw exactly who you were, and she made sure you couldn't hurt me. That's what she did. That's what she left me." The room was very quiet after that. David's lawyer closed his folder, said something about needing time to review the documents, said something about being in touch. The standard things lawyers say when the ground has just been pulled out from under their client and they need a minute to figure out what to do next. David stood up, pushed his chair back, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought he might say something. Something bitter or angry or desperate, something that would have confirmed every bad thing I'd been thinking about him since that Sunday night on the couch. But he didn't. He just looked at me for a long time with an expression I still think about sometimes. Not angry, not sad, just empty, like a room that someone has cleaned out and left. And then he turned and walked out of the conference room without a word. His lawyer followed him, folder under his arm, already on his phone. Hargrove and I sat in the silence for a minute after they left. Then he closed his own folder, straightened his glasses, looked at me. "Your mother," he said, "would have been very proud of you today." I nodded. I couldn't speak. Not yet. He smiled. A small, quiet smile, the kind that doesn't need to be bigger than it is. And he said, "Let's go get lunch. I know a place." So we did. We went to a diner 2 blocks away, the kind with vinyl booths and coffee that's been on the burner too long. And we sat across from each other and ate sandwiches. And he told me a little bit about my mama, things I didn't know, stories from years before I was born, the way she used to laugh when something really surprised her. He told me she'd come into his office 15 years ago and sat in that chair and said, very matter-of-factly, "Gerald, I need to make sure my daughter is protected. No matter what happens, no matter who she's married to, I need to make sure." And he said he'd asked her gently if there was a specific reason she was worried, and she'd looked at him and said, "A mother always knows, Gerald, even when her daughter doesn't." I sat with that for a long time, with the coffee going cold in my hands and the noise of the diner around me, the clinking of dishes and the low buzz of other people's conversations, and the quiet hum of a life going on. And I thought about my mama, about the way she'd watch David at family dinners when she thought no one was looking, the way she'd change the subject when he started talking about money, the way she'd look at me sometimes when he wasn't in the room with an expression I'd never quite been able to read. She'd been watching him all along, cataloging, waiting, building. She had been so patient, so impossibly quietly patient, and so incredibly devastatingly smart. The divorce went through about 3 months later. It was anticlimactic, the way real legal things usually are. Paperwork and signatures and a judge who barely looked up from his desk. David didn't fight it. There was nothing left to fight for, and I think he knew it. His lawyer had advised him, apparently, to accept the terms as they were, because any challenge to the trust would be expensive, time-consuming, and almost certainly unsuccessful. So he signed. I signed. And it was done. He didn't get the house. He didn't get the money. He didn't get any of the things he'd been planning to walk away with when he sat down with that lawyer the week before my mama's funeral. What he got was what we'd accumulated together during the marriage, which was some furniture, a car that was 3 years old, and a checking account that, compared to what my mama had left me, was embarrassingly small. He got the life we'd built together, which turned out to be worth a fraction of what he'd imagined. The real wealth, The invisible, patient, decades-long wealth was hers, and it was mine, and he had never seen it coming. I heard later, through people who still talk to people who knew him, that he moved out of state, started over somewhere. I don't know where, and I don't care. Not really. That's the thing nobody tells you about the end of a bad marriage. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a person leaving, and you letting them, and the door closing behind them, and the quiet that comes after feeling less like an ending and more like the air clearing after a storm. I went back to teaching in the fall. Mrs. Torres had kept my position open, held it for me, she said, without even being asked, because that's just who she was and that's what Millbrook was. The kids were glad to see me back. One of them, a little girl named Sophie, with a gap in her front teeth and a laugh that could fill a room, ran up to me on the first day and hugged my waist so hard she almost knocked me over and said, "Mrs. Marsh, we missed you so much." And I held her, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not painfully, but like something thawing, like something that had been frozen for a long time was finally, slowly, starting to come back to life. I kept the house, my mama's house. I go there on weekends, mostly, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to work on the garden. I've learned, over the past year, what she used to do out there. The pruning, the planting, the way you have to turn the soil before anything new can grow. It's not something I'm good at yet, but I'm learning. And sometimes, when I'm out there on my knees in the dirt, hands dark with earth, I feel her. Not in a spooky way, not in a way I could explain to anyone who hasn't felt it, just a presence, a warmth, like someone standing just behind me, watching over my shoulder, nodding at what I'm doing, saying, "Yes, like that. You've got it." I still have the blue notebook. It sits on my nightstand now, the same place it sat on hers. I don't read it every day, but sometimes, when I can't sleep, I flip through it. The grocery, lists, the bird she saw, the good tea in the green box, small things, ordinary things, the record of a life lived quietly and well in all the ways that matter most. And sometimes I turn to the back, to that last page, and I read her words one more time. Don't let them rush you. I haven't. I won't. The garden is growing. Spring is here, the real kind this time, warm and bright and honest. The tomatoes are coming up. The raised beds are full. And if you were to stand on the back porch steps on an evening like this one, the light going gold, the crickets just starting up, the yard stretching out in front of you quiet and green and alive, you might almost feel like someone was sitting right there beside you. Someone with a glass of iced tea and a smile that meant she knew something you didn't. And you'd be right.